The blood-red sun dipped low over Ordway, Colorado, casting long shadows across the dusty Main Street as Theresa James clutched the crumpled paper in her trembling hands, a formal notice of banishment signed by Mayor Franklin himself, condemning her to exile before nightfall for the moral corruption of carrying a child without a husband to claim it. Spring of 1878 had brought more than just wildflowers to the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. For Theresa, it had brought both tragedy and new life, a cruel irony that left her 22-year-old shoulders bearing more weight than seemed possible. Only 2 months a widow, she stood at the edge of town, one hand resting on her slightly swollen belly, the other gripping the handle of a small cart containing everything she owned in the world, which wasn't much. Behind her, Ordway buzzed with the evening's activities, townspeople purposefully avoiding her gaze as she made her final departure. The whispers had started the moment Dr. Harrison confirmed what Theresa already knew, that her late husband Michael had left her with child before his untimely death in the mine collapse. What should have been cause for comfort in her grief, instead, became her downfall in a town that prided itself on proper appearances. Indecent to parade around in such a condition, Mrs. Whittaker had said loudly at church the previous Sunday, not bothering to lower her voice as Theresa passed by. Her poor husband not even cold in his grave. The town council had deliberated for all of 15 minutes before reaching their verdict. Without family to defend her name, and with Michael's meager mining wages barely covering his burial, Theresa had no means to fight the decision. She was to leave Ordway immediately, taking with her the scandal of her pregnancy. The cool spring air whipped around her calico dress as she tugged the cart forward, her thoughts spinning with fear and uncertainty. Where would she go? The nearest town was Carson Creek, nearly 40 miles east, an impossible journey on foot for a woman alone, let alone one with child. As the last wooden buildings of Ordway fell behind her, Theresa felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough since Michael's death. Now she needed strength, not sorrow. The dirt road stretched before her, winding through scrubby pines and rocky outcroppings. She would make it as far as she could before nightfall, then find somewhere to make camp. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart race. Bandits, Indians, or perhaps someone from town coming to ensure she truly left. Theresa stepped to the side of the road, keeping her eyes downcast as was proper, but her hand slipped to the small knife hidden in the folds of her skirt, the last gift Michael had given her for protection. "Madam, you heading somewhere particular this time of evening?" The voice was deep but gentle, with a slight drawl that marked him as not being from Ordway originally. Theresa looked up, shading her eyes against the setting sun to see a man atop a sturdy buckskin horse. His face was partially hidden beneath the wide brim of his hat, but she could see he was young, perhaps late 20s, with a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. "I'm heading east," she answered simply, not wanting to reveal too much to a stranger. The rider shifted in his saddle, and now she could see him more clearly tanned skin weathered by sun and wind, intelligent blue eyes assessing her situation with a quick glance. He wore simple clothing, dusty from the trail, with a gun holstered at his hip that looked well worn but well cared for. East is a mighty long way to be walking, especially. His eyes flickered briefly to her middle before returning respectfully to her face. "Especially alone. I don't have much choice in the matter," Theresa replied, her voice stronger than she felt. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Isaac Blackwell. Most folks call me Ike. I'm heading toward Carson Creek myself." He glanced at her small cart and the difficult road ahead. "It's not my place to pry, but no one should be traveling this road alone, particularly not a woman in my condition." Theresa finished for him, a flash of defiance in her amber eyes. Isaac removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "I was going to say anyone with Ordway at their back. That town's not known for its charity." Despite herself, Theresa felt a small smile tug at her lips. "No, it certainly isn't. Look, Mrs. James, Theresa James, Mrs. James." Night's coming on fast, and these foothills aren't safe after dark. I've got a campsite about a mile ahead with a fire already built. You're welcome to share it. I give you my word as a gentleman that you'll come to no harm." Theresa hesitated, studying the stranger carefully. In her situation, trusting a man she'd just met could be dangerous, but something in his steady gaze spoke of honesty. And the alternative, spending the night alone on the trail, seemed far more frightening. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Isaac replaced his hat and shrugged one shoulder. "My mother raised me to believe that how we treat those in need says more about us than anything else in this life." He gestured to her cart. "May I?" After a moment's consideration, Theresa nodded, and Isaac secured her belongings to his horse with practiced efficiency. He offered his hand to help with the steeper parts of the path, but otherwise kept a respectful distance as they walked, leading his horse between them. "You're not from Ordway originally," Theresa observed as they made their way along the trail. "No, madam. Born in Missouri, but I've been moving west since I was 16. Worked as a ranch hand mostly, did some scouting for the army for a spell." He glanced at her. "You asking because of my accent?" "Partly, and partly because you don't seem to share the town's opinion of me." Isaac's expression darkened. "I've been in Ordway less than a week, long enough to see it's the kind of place that prides itself on appearances more than actual goodness." He hesitated before adding, "I heard about what happened at the council meeting this morning. Seemed to me like a town turning its back on someone who needed help most." They crested a small rise, and ahead Theresa could see the warm glow of a campfire in a small clearing set back from the trail. The sight of it, this simple comfort, nearly broke her composure after the day's trials. "Here we are," Isaac said, helping her navigate the last rocky stretch. "It's not much, but it's sheltered from the wind, and I've got coffee and beans warming." The campsite was indeed modest but well arranged, with a small tent pitched on level ground and the fire built in a ring of stones. Isaac efficiently unloaded her cart, setting her belongings carefully aside, then tended to his horse before turning his attention to the fire. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to a log positioned near the fire. "You must be exhausted." Theresa sank down gratefully, suddenly aware of how her feet ached and how the child within her seemed to press against her spine. "Thank you," she said softly, watching as he poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. The warmth of the cup against her cold fingers was almost as comforting as the first sip of the strong, sweet liquid. "I don't have much, but what I have, I'm happy to share," Isaac said, settling across from her and serving up a plate of beans and some jerky. "Tomorrow we can talk about what comes next, but tonight you should rest." As the night deepened around them and the stars emerged overhead, Theresa found herself studying the cowboy across the fire. There was something in his manner, a quiet confidence, a lack of judgment that made her feel safer than she had since Michael's death. For the first time in months, the knot of fear in her chest loosened slightly. "Why were you at the edge of town?" she asked suddenly, "when you found me?" Isaac looked up from the fire, his blue eyes reflecting the flames. "I was leaving Ordway myself. Came looking for work at the new cattle operation north of town, but," he shrugged, "let's just say the foreman and I had different opinions on how men ought to treat their horses." Theresa nodded, understanding without needing details. "And now, where will you go?" "Carson Creek first, maybe Denver after that. I've got a friend who runs freight wagons between there and the mining towns. Says he could use a good driver." Isaac leaned forward, adding another small log to the fire. "What about you, Mrs. James? Do you have family somewhere?" Theresa shook her head. "No, my parents died of fever when I was 16. Michael, my husband, was all I had." She rested her hand on her stomach. "And now this little one." "How long ago did you lose him?" 2 months. Mining accident, the shaft collapsed." The words came out flat, rehearsed from having to explain so many times. "We'd been married less than a year." Isaac nodded slowly, respect and sympathy in his gaze, but mercifully no pity. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. James." "Thank you." She stared into the fire, remembering Michael's laugh, his gentle hands, the future they'd planned together. The irony is that he was so happy about the baby, said it was a blessing coming when it did. He'd just gotten a promotion at the mine, thought we were finally getting ahead. A bitter smile crossed her lips. Then he was gone, and suddenly the same child he celebrated became my shame, according to Ordway. Isaac's jaw tightened. That's not right. No, Theresa agreed quietly. But it's the way of things, isn't it? A woman alone has few choices. Maybe, Isaac said, his voice thoughtful, but maybe the road ahead has more possibilities than you can see tonight. As the fire burned lower and the night grew deeper, Theresa felt exhaustion washing over her. Isaac noticed her struggling to keep her eyes open and quickly arranged his bedroll inside the small tent. "You take the tent," he said firmly when she began to protest. "I'll sleep fine out here by the fire. Done it hundreds of times." Too tired to argue, Theresa thanked him and retreated to the tent. As she lay down, pulling the rough woolen blanket around her, she could hear Isaac moving about the campsite, securing things for the night. There was something immensely comforting about those sounds, another human being nearby, standing watch. For the first time since the council's verdict, Theresa allowed herself to close her eyes without fear, the rhythmic sounds of the night and the soft nickering of Isaac's horse lulling her toward sleep. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, at least, she wasn't alone. Dawn broke clear and cool over the foothills, painting the landscape in soft gold light. Theresa woke to the aroma of coffee and the quiet sounds of Isaac moving around the camp. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, the unfamiliar tent, the hard ground beneath her, but then the events of yesterday came flooding back, banished. Alone, pregnant, and rescued in a way by a kind stranger. She emerged from the tent to find Isaac crouched by the fire, frying bacon in a small cast iron pan. He looked up at her approach, offering a simple good morning that somehow held no awkwardness despite their unusual circumstances. "Good morning," she replied, self-consciously smoothing her rumpled dress. "I hope I didn't sleep too late." "Not at all, sun's barely up." He handed her a cup of coffee, black and steaming. "Sleep well, better than I expected to," Theresa admitted, gratefully accepting the coffee. "Thank you again for your kindness." Isaac nodded acknowledgement, turning his attention back to the bacon. "Thought we might talk about what comes next over breakfast, if that suits you." They ate sitting side by side on the log, plates balanced on their knees, bacon, hardtack softened in the bacon grease, and the last of Isaac's dried apples. It was simple fare, but the best meal Theresa had eaten in days. "Carson Creek is about 4 days' journey from here on horseback," Isaac said, setting his empty plate aside. "Slower with the cart, though Samson here can carry most of your things." He patted his horse's flank affectionately. "I can't ask you to escort me all that way," Theresa protested. "You've already done more than enough." Isaac studied her for a moment. "Mrs. James, I'm headed that direction anyway, and I'd rest easier knowing you arrived safely." His blue eyes met hers directly. "Unless you'd prefer to travel alone," Theresa hesitated. The sensible part of her knew that accepting more help from this man was risky, not because she feared him, but because she was already indebted to him, and a woman in her position couldn't afford such debts. Yet the practical reality of her situation was undeniable. "I would welcome the company," she finally said, "but I insist on paying my way. I don't have much money, but I can cook, mend clothing, whatever is needed to earn my keep." A small smile tugged at the corner of Isaac's mouth. "Fair enough. I'm a terrible cook, as you may have noticed, so that alone would be payment enough." With the decision made, they broke camp efficiently, loading Theresa's belongings onto Samson alongside Isaac's gear. The horse was strong and seemed unbothered by the extra weight. Isaac insisted that Theresa ride for part of the morning, arguing that they'd make better time, and she reluctantly agreed. As they set out, the rising sun at their backs and the vast Colorado landscape stretching before them, Theresa felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear and uncertainty about her future, certainly, but also a fragile hope that she hadn't felt since before Michael's death. Whatever lay ahead in Carson Creek, or beyond, at least she wasn't facing it completely alone. The first day's journey passed uneventfully. Isaac proved to be both a capable guide and an easy traveling companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his travels without prying into Theresa's life or circumstances. They alternated between riding and walking, stopping at midday to rest in the shade of a grove of cottonwoods beside a small creek. "Were you always a cowboy?" Theresa asked as they shared a simple lunch of jerky and hardtack. Isaac leaned back against a tree trunk, hat tipped low over his eyes. "More or less. My father ran a livery stable back in Missouri, had me mucking stalls and grooming horses before I could barely walk." A fond smile crossed his face at the memory. "When the war came, he joined up with the Union forces, never came home." "I'm sorry," Theresa said softly. Isaac shrugged. "I was 12, old enough to help my mother keep the place running for a few years, but after she passed, there wasn't much holding me there." He straightened his hat. "Headed west with a cattle drive when I was 16 and never really stopped moving. No family of your own." "No, madam, never stayed in one place long enough, I suppose." He glanced at her. "What about you? How did you end up in Ordway?" Theresa looked out over the creek, watching the clear water tumble over smooth stones. "Michael, my husband, he heard about the silver mines. Good wages, they said. We'd been married just 3 months when we left Kentucky." She smiled faintly. "He had such plans. A proper house, children, land of our own someday. He sounds like a good man." He was. Theresa absently twisted the simple gold band she still wore. "When the mine collapsed, everyone said how quick it was, that he wouldn't have suffered." She swallowed hard. "I don't know if that's true or just what people say to comfort widows." Isaac was quiet for a moment. "I've seen men die quick and men die slow, Mrs. James. Quick is a mercy, whatever the circumstance." Something in his tone suggested personal knowledge beyond what he'd shared, but Theresa didn't press. They all had their ghosts in this vast, unforgiving country. They continued eastward through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing from rocky foothills to more open country, with stands of pine giving way to scattered juniper and sage. By evening, they had made good progress, stopping to make camp near a small spring that Isaac knew from previous travels. As Theresa prepared a simple stew from their provisions, she found herself watching Isaac as he cared for Samson, his movements efficient and gentle with the animal. There was something solid about him, a reliability that was increasingly rare in a world that had proved so uncertain for her. "He's a beautiful horse," she commented as Isaac returned to the fire. "And he knows it," Isaac replied with a chuckle, accepting the bowl of stew she offered. "Vainest creature I've ever owned, but he's sure-footed and smart, which matters more out here." They ate in companionable silence as darkness settled around them, the night alive with the chirping of crickets and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. After dinner, as Theresa washed the dishes in water heated over the fire, she felt Isaac watching her. "May I ask you something, Mrs. James?" She looked up, hands stilling in the warm water. "Of course. What will you do in Carson Creek?" The question hung in the air between them, practical and pointed. Theresa had been avoiding thinking too specifically about her future, focused instead on the immediate problem of getting away from Ordway. But Isaac's direct question forced her to confront the reality of her situation. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "Find work if I can, at least until the baby comes." She glanced down at her slightly swollen middle. "After that, I don't know." Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "Carson Creek's bigger than Ordway, but not by much. Folks might be just as quick to judge." "Do you have a better suggestion?" There was no challenge in her tone, only genuine inquiry. "Denver, maybe. More opportunities in a city that size. More anonymity, too." He set his coffee cup aside. "My friend Jake, the one with the freight business, his wife runs a boarding house there. Decent place, fair prices. She might have work, too." Theresa considered this. Denver was much further than she'd planned to travel, but Isaac's suggestion made sense. A larger city would offer both more opportunities and fewer judgments about her circumstances. "I'll consider it," she said finally, "though I've never lived in a city before." "Think on it," Isaac replied. "No need to decide tonight." Later, as she lay in the tent listening to the night sounds and Isaac's steady breathing from his place by the fire, Theresa found herself wondering at the strange twist of fate that had brought this quiet cowboy into her life just when she needed help most. Was it mere coincidence? Providence? Whatever it was, she was grateful. Her hand moved to rest on her belly, feeling the slight firmness there. "We'll be all right," she whispered to her unborn child. Somehow, The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. They would rise with the sun, break their fast with coffee and whatever simple meal they could prepare, then set out eastward. Isaac insisted that Theresa ride Samson for at least part of each day, particularly during the hottest hours, while he walked alongside, leading the horse and occasionally pointing out features of the landscape or sharing stories of his travels. Theresa found herself increasingly impressed by his knowledge of the country they traversed, which springs could be trusted for clean water, which passes were easiest to navigate, how to read the weather from the shape and movement of the clouds. It was clear he had spent years learning these lessons, often the hard way. On the evening of the third day, as they made camp in a sheltered hollow near a small stream, Theresa noticed Isaac studying the western horizon with a furrowed brow. Something wrong? She asked, looking up from the fire she was building. Storm coming, he replied, nodding toward the darkening sky. Big one from the look of it. Theresa followed his gaze to where dark clouds were building in towering columns, still distant but clearly moving their way. Will it reach us tonight? Probably. We should secure everything and see if we can rig better shelter than just the tent. Isaac scanned their surroundings with a practiced eye. There's an overhang just up that rise that might give us some protection. They worked quickly, moving their camp to the relative shelter of a rocky outcropping that formed a shallow cave. Isaac reinforced the tent with additional stakes and ropes, positioning it against the rock face where it would be partially protected from wind and rain. Samson was brought close, tethered where he would have some shelter from the worst of the elements. The storm hit just after sunset, rolling in with spectacular fury. Lightning split the sky in jagged forks, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. Rain came next, falling in sheets so heavy that the world beyond their small shelter disappeared entirely. Inside the tent, Theresa sat huddled in a blanket, listening to the storm rage. Despite Isaac's preparations, water began to seep in around the edges of the canvas, forming small puddles on the ground cloth. A particularly violent crack of thunder made her jump, and almost immediately, Isaac appeared at the tent opening, rain streaming from his hat and coat. "You all right in here?" he asked, raising his voice to be heard over the storm. "Yes, though it's getting rather damp," Theresa replied, gesturing to the growing puddles. Isaac surveyed the situation quickly. "This isn't going to work. Grab your things, we'll move back to the overhang. It's drier." With no time for propriety, Theresa gathered her belongings and followed Isaac through the driving rain to the shallow cave formed by the rock outcropping. It was indeed drier, though the occasional gust of wind still drove rain into their refuge. Isaac quickly built a small fire near the back of the overhang where the rock offered the most protection. The warmth was welcome, as Theresa found herself shivering in her damp dress. "Here," Isaac said, opening his pack and pulling out a spare shirt. "It's dry, you should change." Theresa hesitated only briefly, before accepting the offered clothing. Modesty was a luxury compared to the very real danger of falling ill while traveling. Isaac tactfully turned his back, moving to the edge of their shelter to check on Samson, giving her privacy to change out of her wet dress. When he returned, she was sitting by the fire wearing his shirt, which hung nearly to her knees with her blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her wet clothing was spread nearby, steaming slightly in the heat from the flames. "Better?" he asked, crouching to add another stick to the fire. Theresa nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "Thank you, it's much warmer." Isaac settled across from her, removing his dripping hat and coat and setting them aside. His own shirt was damp, clinging to broad shoulders, but he seemed unbothered by the discomfort. "Storm like this could last all night," he observed, glancing out at the darkness where rain continued to fall in torrents. "But we're relatively dry, and that's what matters." They sat in silence for a time, listening to the rain and the crackling of the fire. Despite the close quarters and unusual circumstances, Theresa was surprised to find she wasn't uncomfortable in Isaac's company. Over the past few days, she had come to trust his straightforward manner and quiet competence. "May I ask you something?" she said suddenly, looking up to find Isaac watching her with those steady blue eyes. "Of course." "Why did you really help me? That first night at the Edge of Ordway, you could have ridden past. Isaac was quiet for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick. I told you the truth before my mother raised me to help those in need. But that's not all, is it? He met her gaze directly. No, he sighed, setting the stick aside. 8 years ago, I was working cattle in Texas. There was a young woman in the nearest town, Mary was her name. She found herself in a situation not unlike yours, except her sweetheart abandoned her when he found out about the baby. Theresa listened intently, sensing this was a story he didn't share often. She was cast out by her family, shunned by the town, Isaac continued, his voice tight with old anger. I didn't know her well, just seen her at the general store, exchanged pleasantries. By the time I heard what had happened, she'd been gone 3 days. He stared into the fire. They found her a week later. She tried to make it to the next town on foot, didn't survive the journey. Oh, Isaac, Theresa breathed. I'm so sorry. He shook his head. I've always wondered if things might have been different if someone had offered help instead of judgment. When I saw you at the edge of town, looking much as I imagined she did. He trailed off, then finished simply. I couldn't ride past. The honesty of his answer touched Theresa deeply. Without thinking, she reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his. Thank you for telling me. Isaac looked down at their hands, then back to her face, something unreadable in his expression. You should get some rest, Mrs. James. It's been a long day. Theresa withdrew her hand, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the gesture. Yes, of course. They arranged their bedrolls on either side of the fire, maintaining propriety as best they could in the confined space. As Theresa settled beneath her blanket, she found herself studying Isaac's profile in the flickering firelight. There was a strength in him that went beyond the physical immoral certainty, a sense of right and wrong that seemed increasingly rare in a world that often rewarded the cruel and selfish. The storm continued through the night, but within their rocky shelter, with the fire burning low between them, Theresa felt a sense of security that had eluded her since Michael's death. Whatever tomorrow might bring, tonight she was safe. The storm passed by morning, leaving behind a freshly washed landscape and a brilliant blue sky. They set out after breakfast, making good time on the rain-dampened trail that was now free of dust. By mid-afternoon, they crested a rise and saw Carson Creek spread out in the valley below a town perhaps twice the size of Ordway, with several streets radiating from a central square. There it is, Isaac said, stopping to let Theresa take in the view. Carson Creek. Not Denver, but bigger than what you left behind. Theresa shaded her eyes, studying the town that might become her new home. From this distance, it looked peaceful, promising, but she knew appearances could be deceiving. Have you spent much time there? She asked. Some. It's a trading hub for the region ranchers, miners, travelers passing through, more tolerant than Ordway in my experience. He glanced at her. Still thinking about what comes next, Theresa nodded. Over the past days, she'd been weighing her options carefully. Carson Creek represented the immediate safety she'd been seeking, but Isaac's suggestion of Denver lingered in her mind. A larger city might indeed offer more opportunities and greater anonymity. Yet there was another factor she hadn't anticipated, one that made her decision more complicated. In the short time they'd traveled together, she had come to rely on Isaac's steady presence, his quiet strength. The thought of parting ways left her with an unexpected hollow feeling. I'm still considering Denver, she admitted. Your friend's boarding house sounds promising. Isaac nodded, his expression giving nothing away. We could be there in another week, weather permitting. He adjusted his hat. But let's get you settled in Carson Creek first. A proper bed and hot bath will do you good after days on the trail. They made their way down to the town, arriving as the afternoon was waning. Carson Creek proved to be a bustling place compared to Ordway, with wagons and riders moving along the main street and businesses still open for trade. Isaac led the way to a modest hotel near the center of town, helping Theresa down from Sampson and gathering her belongings. The hotel owner, a plump woman named Mrs. Peterson, greeted them with friendly efficiency. Room for you and your wife, sir, she asked, looking between them. 2 rooms, please, Isaac corrected immediately. Mrs. James is a widow traveling to visit family. I've been escorting her from Ordway." Theresa felt a flush rise to her cheeks at the assumption, but Mrs. Peterson simply nodded and made the arrangements without further comment. Isaac paid for both rooms despite Theresa's protests. "You can repay me with a proper meal," he said with a smile. "Mrs. Peterson says the hotel dining room serves a good supper." After being shown to her room small but clean, with a real bed that looked like heaven after nights on the ground, Theresa indulged in the luxury of a hot bath. The hotel offered the service for an additional fee, and it was worth every penny. As she sank into the steaming water, she felt the aches and dust of the journey melting away. Later, refreshed and wearing her cleanest dress hastily pressed with the room's small iron, she met Isaac in the hotel dining room. He had also bathed and changed, his usual trail-worn appearance transformed by clean clothes and freshly trimmed beard. The sight of him waiting at a table, standing as she approached, caused a flutter in her chest that she wasn't prepared for. "Mrs. James," he greeted her with a slight bow. "You look rested." "Amazing what hot water and soap can accomplish," she replied with a smile, taking the seat he offered. "Thank you again for arranging the rooms." They ordered supper: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread that made Theresa nearly weep with joy after days of hardtack and jerky. As they ate, the conversation turned inevitably to what would come next. "I've been thinking about your Denver suggestion," Theresa said, setting down her fork. "It makes sense, practically speaking. More opportunities, as you said." Isaac nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Jake's wife Ellen is a good woman. She'd help you get settled." He hesitated before adding, "I'd see you safely there, of course." The offer hung in the air between them, and Theresa found herself studying Isaac's face, trying to read beyond his careful words. Over the past days, something had shifted between them, a connection forming that went beyond the circumstance of her rescue. She had begun to see glimpses of the man behind the quiet cowboy exterior, his dry humor, his compassion, his unwavering sense of right and wrong. And after that, she asked softly, "Where would you go?" Isaac's blue eyes met hers directly. "I haven't decided. Jake's offer of work is still open." "So you might stay in Denver." "I might," he acknowledged, something unspoken in his tone. The possibility hung between them that their paths might not necessarily diverge in Denver. It was too soon, too complicated to put into words, but Theresa felt the weight of it nonetheless. "Then I think Denver is where I should go," she said finally, "if your offer to escort me still stands." "It does." A small smile touched his lips. "We can rest here a couple of days, resupply, then continue on." The decision made, they finished their meal in companionable silence, both aware that something significant had shifted in their journey together, though neither quite ready to name it. Later, alone in her room, Theresa stood by the window looking out at the moonlit street below. Carson Creek slept, a few lamps still burning in windows here and there. In the room across the hall, Isaac was likely making plans for their continued journey. Practical, reliable Isaac, who had appeared in her life at the moment she most needed help. Her hand moved to rest on her growing belly, feeling the slight swell that would soon be impossible to hide. "Your father would have loved you so much," she whispered to the child within, "and he would have wanted us to be safe, to find our way forward." The thought of Michael brought the familiar ache of loss, but it was gentler now, softened somehow by the days on the trail with Isaac. Grief, she was learning, could exist alongside hope, the two emotions not canceling each other but somehow coexisting in her heart. As she prepared for bed, Theresa found herself wondering what awaited her in Denver, and more immediately, what the journey there with Isaac might bring. For the first time since the mine collapse, she felt a genuine curiosity about the future rather than just fear. 2 days in Carson Creek passed quickly. They rested, replenished their supplies, and prepared for the longer journey to Denver. Isaac arranged for a small wagon, nothing fancy, but sturdy enough for the trail and more comfortable for Theresa than riding horseback as her pregnancy advanced. Samson would pull it, with Isaac riding alongside or walking as terrain demanded. On the morning of their departure, Theresa found herself almost reluctant to leave the comfort of the hotel. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, even this brief respite in Carson Creek had felt like a sanctuary. But Denver promised more, a true fresh start, beyond the shadow of Ordway's judgment. Isaac was waiting by the loaded wagon, checking the harness one final time when Theresa emerged from the hotel. He looked up at her approach, and something in his expression made her heart quicken. "Ready?" he asked simply. "As I'll ever be," she replied with a small smile. They set out as the sun was climbing in the eastern sky, leaving Carson Creek behind and joining the well-traveled road that would eventually lead them to Denver. The spring landscape was in full bloom now, the plains covered in wildflowers that swayed in the gentle breeze. The journey to Denver would take at least a week, Isaac explained, possibly longer depending on weather and road conditions. But with the wagon, they could travel more comfortably, and Theresa wouldn't need to walk as much, which was a blessing as she found herself tiring more easily these days. That first night on the trail from Carson Creek, as they sat by the campfire after a simple supper, Theresa found herself studying Isaac's profile in the flickering light. He was whittling a small piece of wood, his large hands surprisingly deft with the small knife, seemingly lost in thought. "What are you making?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Isaac looked up, almost startled, as if he'd forgotten he wasn't alone. "Nothing in particular, just keeping my hands busy." He examined the piece of wood, which was beginning to take the rough shape of a horse. "My father taught me," said idle hands led to trouble. "It's beautiful," Theresa said, leaning closer to see the emerging details. "You have a gift." Isaac shrugged, but she could see he was pleased by the compliment. "Just practice. I've spent a lot of evenings alone by campfires over the years." "Do you ever get lonely?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider it, perhaps too personal for their still evolving relationship. But Isaac didn't seem offended. He set the carving aside, considering her question seriously. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Though I've gotten used to my own company. What about you? Since Michael died, I've felt lonely even when surrounded by people," Theresa said softly. "In Ordway, after the mine collapse, neighbors brought food the minister visited, but no one really saw me. Just the widow to be pitied and later the woman to be judged." And now their eyes met across the fire, and Theresa felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the flames between them. "Now I feel seen," she said simply. Something shifted in Isaac's expression, a softening, a vulnerability she hadn't glimpsed before. For a moment, it seemed he might say more, but instead, he simply nodded and picked up his carving again. The moment passed, but its effect lingered in the air between them, a tentative acknowledgement of the connection forming between two people who had expected only to be traveling companions. As the days passed and they drew closer to Denver, Theresa found herself increasingly aware of Isaac's presence, the timbre of his voice, the way sunlight caught in his hair when he removed his hat, the strength in his hands as he handled the reins or helped her in and out of the wagon. She told herself it was natural, given their close quarters and shared journey, but in quiet moments, she recognized it as something more. It was on the 5th day out from Carson Creek that trouble found them. They had stopped for their midday rest near a small creek, taking advantage of the shade offered by a stand of cottonwoods. Isaac had just finished refilling their water barrels when the sound of approaching riders caught their attention. 3 men on horseback appeared around a bend in the trail, riding hard in their direction. Something in their manner, the purposeful way they approached, hands hovering near weapons, immediately put Isaac on alert. "Get in the wagon," he said quietly to Theresa, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. Theresa complied quickly, heart pounding as she watched the riders draw nearer. They were rough-looking men, trail-worn and armed, with the hard eyes of those who lived by taking rather than earning. The lead rider, a tall man with a ragged scar across one cheek, reined his horse to a stop a few yards away. "Afternoon," he called, his friendly tone at odds with his calculating gaze as it swept over their wagon and supplies. "Afternoon," Isaac replied neutrally, standing his ground between the men and the wagon where Theresa sat. "Something I can help you with," the scarred man smiled, revealing a missing front tooth. "Just passing through, same as you folks. Thought we might share your shade for a spell." His eyes flicked to Theresa. "Mighty pretty traveling companion you got there." Theresa felt a chill despite the warm day. Isaac's posture shifted subtly, his right hand now resting openly on his holstered gun. "We were just leaving," Isaac said, his voice level but with an edge of steel beneath. "Creek's all yours." The scarred man exchanged glances with his companions, a burly, bearded fellow and a younger man with cold eyes. "Now that ain't very neighborly," he drawled. "We've been riding hard, could use some rest. Maybe share some of them supplies you got." "We've barely enough for ourselves," Isaac replied, still calm but clearly unmoved. "Denver's not far, you'll find what you need there." The tension stretched between them, a silent assessment of strength and will. Theresa watched, scarcely breathing, as the scarred man seemed to weigh his options, eyes narrowing as they took in Isaac's steady stance and unwavering gaze. Finally, the man spat to one side. "Come on, boys, these folks ain't feeling sociable." He fixed Isaac with a hard stare. "Trail's long between here and Denver. Might see you again." It was clearly a threat, but Isaac didn't flinch. "Safe travels," he said evenly. The three riders moved off, but not before casting long looks at their wagon and supplies. Once they were out of sight, Isaac quickly moved to prepare for departure, his movements efficient but urgent. "We need to put distance between us and them," he explained as he helped Theresa down from the wagon so she could stretch her legs before they continued. "They'll be back, likely after nightfall." Theresa felt fear twist in her stomach. "Who were they?" "Trouble," Isaac said simply, checking Samson's harness with practiced hands. "Not uncommon in these parts, men who find taking easier than working." He glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. "Don't worry, we'll be fine if we keep moving." They traveled until well after sunset that day, stopping only when it became too dark to safely navigate the trail. Isaac chose their campsite carefully, a defensible position with clear sightlines in all directions, set back from the main trail. "No fire tonight," he said, as he helped Theresa down from the wagon. "Can't risk the light drawing attention." They ate a cold supper, huddled together against the evening chill. Isaac's rifle lay across his knees, and Theresa noticed he checked his pistol several times, ensuring it was loaded and ready. "Do you think they'll really come after us?" she asked in a low voice, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Isaac's eyes scanned the darkness beyond their camp. "Maybe, maybe not, but better to be prepared." He glanced at her, concern evident in his gaze. "Try to get some rest, I'll keep watch." "You can't stay awake all night," Theresa protested. "Wouldn't be the first time," he replied with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Despite her anxiety, exhaustion soon overtook Theresa. She fell asleep listening to the soft sounds of Isaac moving about the camp, checking perimeters, a quiet guardian in the darkness. She woke suddenly hours later to Isaac's hand over her mouth, his voice a whisper in her ear. "Someone's coming, stay quiet." Heart hammering, Theresa nodded her understanding and Isaac removed his hand. She could see nothing in the pitch darkness, but her ears strained to catch whatever sound had alerted him. Then she heard it, the soft clink of metal, the muffled thud of hooves trying to move quietly. Someone was approaching their camp, attempting stealth. Isaac pressed his rifle into her hands. "If anything happens to me, use this," he whispered, his breath warm against her cheek. "Just aim and pull the trigger." Before she could protest, he was gone, moving silently away from where she lay hidden beneath blankets in the wagon bed. Theresa clutched the rifle, its weight unfamiliar and frightening in her hands. The night seemed to press in around her, every sound magnified in the darkness. Minutes stretched like hours as she waited, scarcely breathing. Then came a shout, followed by the explosive sound of a gunshot that shattered the night's silence. Another shot followed, then the thunder of hooves retreating rapidly. "Isaac." Theresa called, panic rising in her throat as silence fell once more. "I'm here," came his voice from the darkness, and then he was beside the wagon, a darker shadow against the night. "They're gone." Relief flooded through her, so intense she felt light-headed. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Fired a warning shot when I caught one of them trying to steal Samson." Isaac took the rifle from her trembling hands. "They weren't expecting resistance. Took off when they realized we were awake and armed. Will they come back? Not tonight, I don't think, but we should move on at first light." He hesitated, then added quietly, "I'm sorry you had to experience that. Don't apologize. Theresa said firmly, reaching out to grasp his arm in the darkness. You protected us. Isaac covered her hand with his own, a brief touch that somehow conveyed more than words could have. Get some more sleep if you can. I'll keep watch until dawn. Despite her racing thoughts, Theresa eventually drifted back to sleep, comforted by Isaac's steady presence nearby. She dreamed of strong hands and blue eyes, of safety found in unlikely places. They broke camp at the first hint of dawn, eager to put miles between themselves and the would-be thieves. Isaac was quiet as they traveled, his gaze constantly scanning the horizon, alert for any sign of pursuit. By midday, it seemed clear they weren't being followed, and some of the tension eased from his shoulders. They stopped briefly to rest Samson and eat a simple meal, the incident of the previous night hanging between them like an unspoken acknowledgement of how quickly their journey could have turned tragic. Thank you, Theresa said suddenly, looking up from the bread she was slicing. For last night. For everything. Isaac met her gaze, something warm and complicated in his blue eyes. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. She set the knife down, choosing her words carefully. When I left Ordway, I had nothing but fear and uncertainty ahead of me. You changed that, Isaac. You gave me hope again. He looked away, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, Theresa said firmly. They wouldn't have. That's what I've learned most clearly these past weeks. She moved closer until he had no choice but to meet her eyes again. Most people look away from others' suffering. You didn't, that matters. Something shifted in Isaac's expression, a vulnerability he usually kept carefully hidden. Theresa, he began, using her given name for the first time. But whatever he might have said was interrupted by the distant sound of a wagon approaching. The moment broken, they both turned to see a freight wagon coming into view around a bend in the trail, heavily loaded and drawn by a team of 4 sturdy horses. Isaac stepped forward, shading his eyes against the midday sun. That's Jake's wagon, he said with surprise, recognizing the distinctive painted logo on the side. The freight wagon drew nearer, and Theresa could make out the driver, now a burly man with a full beard and a wide-brimmed hat. He raised a hand in greeting as he spotted them. Ike Blackwell, as I live and breathe, the man called as he drew his team to a halt. Didn't expect to find you on this stretch of road. Jake, Isaac replied with genuine pleasure, moving forward to clasp the man's hand as he jumped down from the driver's seat. Headed back to Denver. Just delivered mining equipment to the new operation west of Carson Creek. Good timing running into you, was fixing to stop for dinner anyway. Jake's curious gaze moved to Theresa, who stood by their wagon. Jake, this is Mrs. Theresa James, Isaac said, gesturing for her to join them. Mrs. James, Jake Wilson, the friend I mentioned who runs freight between Denver and the mining towns. Madam, Jake said, tipping his hat respectfully. Pleasure to meet you. Likewise, Mr. Wilson, Theresa replied with a smile. Isaac has spoken highly of you. Jake raised an eyebrow at Isaac. Has he now? Wonders never cease. His keen eyes noted her condition, though he made no comment on it. You folks heading to Denver? Yes, Isaac confirmed. I was planning to inquire about that job you mentioned when we arrive. Still available if you want it, Jake said easily. Ellen will be pleased to see you too. Always says you're too skinny and need feeding up. He glanced at Theresa again. You traveling together long? Mrs. James was in need of an escort from Ordway, Isaac explained, offering no details about the circumstances of their meeting. I mentioned your wife's boarding house as a possible situation for her in Denver. Understanding dawned in Jake's eyes. Ellen's place is a good one, he agreed. Clean, respectable. She doesn't ask too many questions either. This last was directed at Theresa with a kindness that suggested he understood something of her situation without needing it spelled out. She felt a rush of gratitude for this stranger's tact. That sounds perfect, she said sincerely. Jake insisted they join him for a meal, and soon they were sharing coffee and beans around a small fire. The older man was full of stories from the trail, and Theresa found herself laughing for what felt like the first time in months at his colorful descriptions of mishaps and adventures. As Jake and Isaac discussed the route ahead, Theresa observed the easy camaraderie between the two men. It was clear they had known each other for years, and shared a mutual respect. She found herself wondering about Isaac's life before their paths crossed the places he'd been, the people who had shaped him into the man who had come to her aid that night at the Edge of Ordway. When the meal was finished, Jake offered them a proposition. "Why don't you folks travel with me back to Denver? Safety in numbers and I could use the company. Been talking to myself too long on this trip." Isaac glanced at Theresa, silently asking her preference. She nodded, seeing the practical advantages of joining Jake's journey. "We'd be grateful for the company," Isaac agreed. "Had some trouble last night with road agents." Jake's expression darkened. "They've been plaguing this stretch for months now. Authorities in Denver don't seem too concerned as long as the main stagecoach routes are safe." He patted the shotgun resting beside him. "They tend to leave freight wagons alone, too much trouble for too little reward. You'll be safer traveling with me." With the decision made, they quickly prepared to continue, now as part of Jake's small convoy. As they set out, Theresa found herself riding beside Jake in his larger wagon, while Isaac drove their smaller one behind. Jake proved to be a thoughtful conversationalist, sharing stories of Denver and his wife Ellen's boarding house without prying into Theresa's own circumstances. "Ellen's had her share of women arrive in similar situations to yours, if you don't mind my saying so," he mentioned casually as they traveled. "She's got a good heart and a practical mind, helps folks get back on their feet without judgment." Isaac spoke highly of her, Theresa replied. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." Jake glanced back at where Isaac followed behind them, then lowered his voice slightly. "Known that boy for 8 years now, never seen him take such an interest in someone's welfare before." His eyes, kind beneath bushy brows, met hers briefly. "He's a good man, Mrs. James, best I know." Theresa felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "He's been very kind to help me." Jake simply nodded, a knowing look in his eye that suggested he saw more than she was saying. Denver's a place for new beginnings, seen plenty of folks start fresh there. As the afternoon waned and the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Theresa found her thoughts turning to the future that awaited her in Denver. A boarding house, work if Ellen could provide it, the birth of her child in a place where no one knew her story. It was more than she could have hoped for when she'd been forced to leave Ordway. And Isaac, what place would he have in this new beginning? The question lingered in her mind as they made camp that evening, the three travelers sharing a meal around Jake's fire. In the days that followed, they fell into an easy routine of travel. Jake knew the trail well, pointing out landmarks and sharing the history of the places they passed. With his larger wagon and team, they made better time than Theresa and Isaac had on their own. More importantly, they encountered no further trouble from road agents or other dangers. Whether it was Jake's imposing presence, the shotgun he kept prominently displayed, or simply luck, their journey proceeded peacefully. On the evening of the third day traveling with Jake, as they made camp in a pleasant meadow beside a clear stream, Theresa found herself alone with Isaac for the first time in days. Jake had gone to check his team, leaving them by the fire with cups of coffee. "Jake says we should reach Denver by tomorrow afternoon," Isaac said, staring into the flames. "He's already sent word ahead to Ellen about your arrival." "That's very kind of him," Theresa replied, watching Isaac's profile in the firelight. Something in his manner seemed distant tonight, as if his thoughts were elsewhere. "Is everything all right?" Isaac looked up, meeting her gaze. "Just thinking about what comes next, for me or for you?" she asked softly. "Both, I suppose." He set his coffee cup aside. "Jake's job offer is good. Driving freight between Denver and the mining towns. It's steady work, decent pay. You sound uncertain." Isaac was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "I've never stayed in one place very long, always been more comfortable on the move." He glanced at her. "But lately I've been thinking there might be value in putting down roots somewhere." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Theresa felt her heart quicken. "Denver seems like a good place for that," she ventured. Isaac's blue eyes held hers in the firelight. "It does," he agreed quietly. Before either could say more, Jake returned, breaking the moment with his booming voice and plans for the next day's travel. But later, as Theresa prepared for sleep in her small tent, She found herself replaying that brief conversation, wondering at the possibilities it suggested. Denver rose from the plains the following afternoon, a sprawling city that took Theresa's breath away with its size and vitality. After weeks in the wilderness and small towns, the sight of so many buildings, the smoke from countless chimneys, the bustle of commerce and life was almost overwhelming. Jake led them through the outskirts and into the city proper, navigating the increasingly crowded streets with practiced ease. Theresa watched wide-eyed as they passed businesses of all kinds: hotels, saloons, and fine homes. "Ellen's place is in a respectable part of town," Jake explained as they turned onto a tree-lined street where modest but well-maintained homes stood in neat rows. "Not fancy, but clean and proper. She runs a tight ship." They drew up before a large 3-story house painted a cheerful yellow with white trim. Flower boxes brightened the windows, and a small sign beside the front door read simply, "Wilson Boarding House." Before Jake could even call out, the front door opened, and a plump woman with graying hair hurried down the steps. "Jake Wilson, you're 2 days later than you said you'd be," she exclaimed, though her bright smile belied any real annoyance. "Ran into friends on the road," Jake replied, jumping down from his wagon to embrace his wife. "Ellen, you remember Isaac Blackwell?" "Of course I do," Ellen said warmly, turning to where Isaac was helping Theresa down from their wagon. "It's been too long, young man." Her gaze shifted to Theresa, taking in her condition with a quick, understanding glance. "And this must be Mrs. James." "Yes, madam," Theresa replied, suddenly nervous beneath the woman's assessing gaze. "Theresa James." Ellen's face softened into a genuine smile. "Welcome to Denver, Mrs. James. Jake's letter said you're in need of lodging and perhaps employment." "Yes, if it's possible." "We'll talk about all that once you've rested," Ellen said firmly. "You must be exhausted from the journey. Come inside, both of you. Jake can see to the wagons." The interior of the boarding house was as neat and welcoming as its exterior suggested. Polished wood floors, simple but quality furnishings, and the smell of something delicious baking created an immediate sense of hominess that brought unexpected tears to Theresa's eyes. Ellen showed them to adjacent rooms on the second floor, simple accommodations with clean linens and solid furniture. "Supper's at 6, she informed them. "Nothing fancy, but plenty of it. The washroom is at the end of the hall if you'd like to freshen up before then." Left alone in her room, Theresa sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the realization that her journey was over. She had reached Denver safely, found shelter and the promise of work, and left behind the judgment of Ordway. It seemed almost miraculous after the uncertainty she had faced just weeks ago, and yet, mixed with her relief was a strange melancholy. What would happen now? Would Isaac take Jake's job offer and stay in Denver? And if he did, what might that mean for their relationship, which had grown from stranger to protector to? Something neither of them had yet defined. These questions lingered as she washed away the dust of travel and changed into her cleanest dress for supper. When she descended to the dining room, she found a long table set for the boarders, with Ellen bustling about, putting final touches on the meal. Isaac was already there, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt, deep in conversation with Jake. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression, a warmth, an appreciation, made her heart flutter despite her fatigue. He rose quickly, pulling out a chair for her beside his own. "Mrs. James," he greeted her with a small smile, "you look rested." "Amazing what clean water and a real bed can do," she replied, returning his smile as she took the offered seat. Supper was a lively affair. Besides Jake, Ellen, Isaac, and Theresa, there were 5 other boarders: 2 elderly sisters who taught at the local school, a quiet young man who worked as a bank clerk, and a middle-aged couple who ran a small haberdashery. All were welcoming, curious about the newcomers but polite enough not to pry. Ellen proved to be an excellent cook, and the table groaned with roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. By the end of the meal, Theresa felt more relaxed and hopeful than she had in months. After the other boarders had dispersed to their rooms or the parlor for the evening, Ellen invited Theresa to join her in the kitchen while she washed the dishes. Isaac and Jake had gone to the barn to discuss the freight business, leaving the women alone. So, Ellen said as she handed Theresa a towel to dry the dishes, Jake tells me you're widowed and expecting. Theresa tensed slightly, but Ellen's tone held no judgment, only practical interest. Yes, my husband died in a mining accident 2 months ago in Ordway. Ellen nodded, her hands moving efficiently in the soapy water. And the town's reaction to your condition wasn't charitable, I'm guessing. No, Theresa admitted. They asked me to leave. Ellen made a disgusted sound. Small minds in small towns. Well, you'll find Denver more forgiving, though still not perfect. She glanced at Theresa. How far along are you? About 4 months now, so you've time yet to establish yourself before the baby comes. Ellen handed her another plate to dry. I could use help around the boarding house cleaning rooms, laundry, some cooking if you're handy with it. Room and board plus a small wage. After the baby comes, we can adjust as needed. Relief washed over Theresa. That would be wonderful, Mrs. Wilson. Ellen, please. The older woman smiled kindly. And there's something else you should know. I've helped several young women in your situation over the years. Some stay and make lives here, others move on when they're ready. Either way, you'll find no judgment under this roof. Tears pricked at Theresa's eyes. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know how to repay such kindness. No need for that, Ellen said briskly, though her eyes were gentle. Now about Isaac. She let the sentence hang, a question in her tone. Theresa felt her cheeks warm. He helped me when no one else would. I owe him a great deal. Ellen studied her for a moment, then nodded as if confirming something to herself. He's a good man, known him since he was barely more than a boy, always moving, never settling until now, perhaps. Before Theresa could respond to this observation, the kitchen door opened, and Isaac himself appeared, followed by Jake. Ellen, your pie was magnificent as always, Jake declared, making a show of patting his stomach. I've been dreaming of it for weeks on the trail. Ellen rolled her eyes affectionately. Flatterer. She glanced between Isaac and Theresa. I was just telling Mrs. James about the work available here at the boarding house. Isaac's gaze moved to Theresa, a question in his eyes. She smiled, answering his unspoken inquiry. Ellen has very generously offered me a position, room, board, and wages. That's excellent news, Isaac said, genuine pleasure in his voice. And I've agreed to take Jake up on his offer of work with the freight business. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that their paths, which might have diverged upon reaching Denver, would instead continue to run parallel. Later that evening, as the boarding house settled into nighttime quiet, Theresa stood by the window in her room, looking out at the city lights of Denver. So much had changed in the span of a few short weeks. From the despair of banishment to the hope of a new beginning, her journey had been one of unexpected turns. And through it all, there had been Isaac's steady, honorable Isaac, who had appeared at her darkest moment and stayed by her side through dangers and uncertainties. A soft knock at her door drew her from her reverie. Opening it, she found Isaac standing in the hallway, hat in his hands, expression uncertain. I hope I'm not disturbing you, he said quietly. I just wanted to make sure you were settled in comfortably. You're not disturbing me at all, Theresa assured him, opening the door wider in invitation. Please come in. Isaac hesitated only briefly before stepping into the room, though he remained standing near the door as if unsure of his welcome. Ellen's a good woman. You'll be well looked after here. Yes, she's been incredibly kind, Theresa agreed, watching him curiously. There was something on his mind, she could tell something beyond simple concern for her comfort. Is everything all right, Isaac? He met her gaze directly, and she saw in his blue eyes a vulnerability that touched her deeply. I wanted to tell you. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. These past weeks, traveling with you, protecting you, it's given me purpose in a way I haven't felt in a long time. Theresa felt her heart quicken. I'm grateful for everything you've done, she said softly. It's more than that, Isaac continued, taking a step closer. When we met at the border of Ordway, I was just doing what seemed right, but somewhere along the way something changed. He looked down at the hat in his hands, turning it slowly. I've spent most of my life moving from place to place, never staying long enough to form attachments. It seemed safer that way. And now, Theresa prompted gently when he fell silent. Isaac raised his eyes to meet hers again. Now I find myself wanting to stay, not just in Denver, but with you." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Theresa felt tears welling in her eyes, not of sadness but of a complicated joy. "Isaac," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I care for you deeply, you must know that, but my situation is complicated. I'm carrying another man's child. I'm still grieving Michael in many ways." "I know," he said simply, "and I don't expect anything from you, Theresa. I just wanted you to know that when I took Jake's job offer, it wasn't just about the work. It was about staying near you, being there for you and your child if you'll allow it." He smiled slightly. "I'm not asking for promises, just possibility." Theresa moved toward him, closing the distance between them until she could reach out and take one of his hands in hers. "Possibility is something I can offer," she said softly. "The rest, we'll have to see with time." Isaac's fingers closed gently around hers, his touch warm and reassuring. "Time is something we have now," he agreed. "No more running, no more immediate dangers, just day following day and whatever they might bring." In the quiet of the room, with Denver's lights twinkling beyond the window and the safety of Ellen's boarding house surrounding them, Theresa felt a peace she hadn't known since, before Michael's death. The future remained uncertain in many ways, but for the first time, that uncertainty held promise rather than just fear. Isaac lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so respectful, and yet so intimate that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Rest well, Theresa," he said softly. "Tomorrow is the first day of your new life here." As he turned to leave, Theresa found herself reluctant to let go of his hand. "Isaac," she called softly, stopping him at the door. "Thank you. Not just for helping me reach Denver safely, but for seeing me, truly seeing me when everyone else looked away." His smile, warm and genuine, was the last thing she saw before he closed the door quietly behind him. That night, Theresa slept more peacefully than she had in months, dreamless and deep. When she woke to the morning light filtering through her window, it was with a sense of possibility that had been absent from her life since the day she'd been handed Michael's bloodied hat from the mine collapse. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm of their own. Theresa settled into life at the boarding house, helping Ellen with cooking, cleaning, and laundry. The work was hard but satisfying, and she found comfort in the simple routine of making beds, preparing meals, and ensuring the comfort of the boarders. Isaac began working with Jake, driving freight wagons between Denver and the surrounding mining towns. The work often took him away for days at a time, but he always returned to the boarding house, seeking her out first thing upon his arrival, his eyes lighting up when he found her. Their relationship evolved slowly, carefully. When Isaac was in Denver, they took walks together in the evenings, sometimes accompanied by Ellen or Jake, other times just the two of them. They talked of small things and large, his adventures on the freight routes, her growing confidence in her new life in Denver, books they had read, places they had seen. Gradually, Theresa began to share more about Michael, the good memories, the dreams they had shared, the plans cut short by his death. Isaac listened without jealousy or discomfort, understanding that her past was part of who she was, just as his own experiences had shaped him. As her pregnancy advanced, Ellen became a source of practical wisdom and comfort. The older woman had never had children of her own, but had helped countless young mothers over the years. She ensured Theresa saw Denver's most respected midwife, helped her prepare clothing for the baby, and adjusted her work duties as her condition progressed. On a warm evening in late summer, as Theresa sat on the boarding house's front porch shelling peas for dinner, she looked up to see Isaac coming up the path, earlier than expected from his latest freight run. He carried something in his arms, wrapped in cloth. "You're back sooner than you said," she greeted him with pleasure, setting aside her work as he climbed the steps. "Finished the deliveries faster than planned," he replied, settling beside her on the porch swing. "And I wanted to get this back to you before the baby arrives." He unwrapped the cloth bundle to reveal a beautifully crafted wooden cradle, small enough to fit beside a bed but large enough to serve for many months. The wood was polished to a soft glow, and carved along the sides were delicate wildflowers like those that had dotted the plains during their journey from Ordway. Isaac, Theresa breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. It's beautiful. Did you make this? He nodded, a touch of shyness in his expression. Been working on it whenever I had time at the way stations. Jake knows a carpenter in Central City who let me use his tools during layovers. Tears filled Theresa's eyes as she took in the detail of the carving, the perfect proportions, the hours of work represented in the gift. I don't know what to say. Isaac reached out tentatively, covering her hand with his own where it rested on the cradle. You don't need to say anything. I just wanted your child to have something solid, something made with care. In that moment, looking at this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly and changed it so completely, Theresa felt the last walls around her heart finally crumble. Without hesitation, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a gentle, heartfelt kiss. Isaac's surprise lasted only a moment before he responded, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with infinite tenderness. When they parted, his blue eyes searched hers, wonder and hope mingled in their depths. I've been falling in love with you since the moment you refused to let Ordway's judgment define you, he said softly. But I never expected, nor did I, Theresa interrupted gently. When Michael died, I thought that part of my life was over, and then you appeared on the road out of Ordway, and slowly, day by day, mile by mile, you helped me find hope again. Her hand moved to her rounded belly. This child will always be a part of Michael, a connection to the man I loved first. But my heart has room for a new love too, one I never expected to find. Isaac's smile was brighter than she had ever seen it. I love you, Theresa James, you and the child you carry. If you'll have me, I want to build a life with you here in Denver, a real home, not just rooms in a boarding house. A place where your child can grow up knowing they are cherished. I love you too, Isaac Blackwell, Theresa replied, her voice steady and sure. And yes, I want that life with you however it unfolds, whatever challenges come. 2 weeks later, in the small parlor of Ellen and Jake's boarding house, Theresa and Isaac were married in a simple ceremony performed by the local minister. Ellen had insisted on making a special dress that accommodated Theresa's now prominent pregnancy while still looking properly bridal. Jake stood as witness, beaming proudly as if he personally had arranged the whole match. The other boarders attended, along with the few friends Isaac had made among the freight drivers and a handful of women Theresa had met through Ellen. It was nothing like the wedding she had once envisioned as a young girl in Kentucky, but somehow it was perfect, a celebration not just of love found, but of resilience, of second chances, of hope reborn from despair. With his first wages from Jake's freight business, Isaac had secured a small but comfortable house not far from the boarding house, close enough that Theresa could still help Ellen occasionally, but private enough for them to begin their life together. It needed work, but Isaac had proven himself handy with repairs, and the two of them spent evenings making it into a home. The wooden cradle sat ready in the corner of their bedroom. Alongside furniture Isaac had either built himself or purchased secondhand and refurbished. Slowly, the house was transformed from an empty shell to a warm, inviting home, not with expensive things, but with care and attention to detail that spoke of permanence and commitment. On a crisp autumn evening, as the first snow of the season began to dust Denver's streets, Theresa's labor began. Isaac, who had fortunately returned from a freight run the previous day, raced to fetch both Ellen and the midwife. The hours that followed were a blur of pain, encouragement, and finally, wonder, as Theresa brought her child into the world, a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and a powerful set of lungs. As she held him for the first time, exhausted but elated, she looked up to see Isaac standing by the bedside, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. He's perfect, Isaac whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's tiny hand. Just like his mother. Would you like to hold your son? The midwife asked Isaac, assuming what many now did, that the child was his by blood as well as by choice. Isaac looked to Theresa, a question in his eyes. She nodded, smiling through her own tears. Yes, hold him. He's your son now, too. As Isaac cradled the newborn with careful hands that shook slightly with emotion, Theresa felt a sense of completion, of rightness that transcended the pain and fear of the past year. This moment, her new husband holding her child, their child now, was the culmination of a journey that had begun in sorrow but ended in unexpected joy. "What will you name him?" Ellen asked softly from where she stood organizing linens at the foot of the bed. Theresa and Isaac exchanged a look. They had discussed this at length in the weeks leading up to the birth. "Michael," Theresa said, honoring her first husband's memory. "Michael Isaac James Blackwell." Isaac's eyes widened at the inclusion of his own name, a gesture he had not expected. "It's a strong name," he said hoarsely, clearly moved. "A name with history and meaning." "A name that tells his story," Theresa agreed, "where he came from and who loves him now." In the days and weeks that followed, as autumn deepened toward winter, their small family settled into a new routine. Isaac had spoken with Jake about adjusting his freight routes to keep him closer to Denver, ensuring he wasn't away for more than a day or two at a time. Theresa recovered her strength quickly and found joy in caring for little Michael, whose personality emerged day by day alert, curious, strong-willed. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and a small fire crackling in their hearth, Theresa sat in the rocking chair Isaac had made for her, nursing Michael before putting him down for the night. Isaac knelt beside the cradle, making small adjustments to a mobile he had carved tiny wooden horses and stars that would hang above the baby as he slept. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life," Theresa said softly, watching her husband's deft hands work. "That morning in Ordway when they handed me the banishment notice, I thought my world had ended." Isaac looked up, his blue eyes warm in the firelight. "And now I know it was just beginning," she replied, smiling down at their son, "though I couldn't have imagined it then." Isaac rose and came to stand beside them, one hand gently stroking Michael's dark hair, the other resting on Theresa's shoulder. "I think about that day often, what might have happened if I'd left town an hour earlier or later, if we hadn't met on that road." "But we did meet," Theresa said, reaching up to cover his hand with hers. "And everything changed." As Michael drifted to sleep in her arms, Theresa looked around their small home, modest but filled with warmth and love, and then up at the man who had transformed her life through simple kindness that grew into something much deeper. "When you found me at the edge of Ordway, I was alone and afraid," she said softly. "You rode beside me when no one else would. You protected me when others would have taken advantage. You saw value in me when a whole town saw only shame." Her voice caught slightly. "You gave me back my future, Isaac." Isaac knelt beside the rocking chair, taking her free hand in both of his. "No, Theresa, you saved yourself. You had the courage to keep going when it would have been easier to give up. All I did was recognize that strength and walk alongside it." He pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "That's all I ever want to do, walk beside you for all the days we have." As the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing Denver in pristine white, Theresa looked at her sleeping son and the man she had come to love with her whole heart. The journey from Ordway had been long and fraught with dangers, both physical and emotional. But here, in this moment of perfect peace, she knew with absolute certainty that every step had led exactly where she was meant to be. Spring came to Denver with a riot of color crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow, trees budding with new life, the mountains in the distance shedding their white caps for the season. Michael, now nearly 6 months old, was growing rapidly, a happy, healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's amber eyes. Isaac's work with Jake's freight business had prospered, allowing him to take on more responsibility and better routes. Theresa had begun taking in sewing work that she could do at home while caring for Michael, her skilled needle bringing in additional income for their growing family. On a warm Sunday afternoon in May, they walked together in Denver's Central Park, Michael secured in Isaac's strong arms, gurgling happily at the sights and sounds around him. Theresa linked her arm through her husband's free one, content in a way she had once thought impossible. "I received a letter yesterday," she said as they paused to watch a group of children flying kites in the open field. "From Mrs. Harrison, the doctor's wife in Ordway." Isaac looked down at her with surprise. "I didn't know you maintained correspondence with anyone there." "I don't, usually." but she was one of the few who showed kindness before. Everything happened. Theresa watched the kites dancing on the breeze. She writes that the town council has a new leadership. Apparently, Mayor Franklin was caught embezzling town funds and forced to step down. Justice has a way of finding people eventually, Isaac observed, bouncing Michael gently when he began to fuss. What else did she say? That Ordway is changing. New families moving in, more progressive thinking. Theresa smiled slightly. She mentioned that several people have asked after me with genuine concern, she believes. Isaac was quiet for a moment. Do you ever think about going back, just to visit? Theresa considered the question seriously. Sometimes. Not because I miss Ordway itself, but because it was where Michael and I began our life together, brief as it was, and, she hesitated. It's where you found me, where our story began. Isaac shifted Michael to his other arm, his expression thoughtful. Perhaps someday we could visit. When Michael is older, not to stay but to make peace with the past. Perhaps, Theresa agreed, but not yet. For now, Denver is the home we've built together. They continued their walk, stopping occasionally to greet neighbors or admire the spring flowers. As the afternoon waned, they made their way back to their small house. Now brightened by window boxes Isaac had built and Theresa had planted with cheerful pansies. That evening, after Michael was asleep in the cradle that had been Isaac's first gift to him, they sat together on the small porch Isaac had added to the front of their house. The air was soft with spring scents, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. I was thinking, Isaac said, his arm around Theresa's shoulders as they rocked gently on the swing he had built. Now that the freight business is doing well, we might consider looking for a larger house in a year or two. Something with more room for Michael to play, maybe a garden for you. Theresa leaned into his embrace, content. I'd like that, though I'm happy here too in our first real home. There's something else, Isaac continued, a note of nervous anticipation in his voice. Jake mentioned that he's looking to take on a partner in the freight business, someone to help manage things as the operation grows. He offered me the position. Theresa sat up, turning to look at him with delight. Isaac, that's wonderful. It would mean less time on the road, he finished, smiling at her enthusiasm. More regular hours, a real future here in Denver for all of us. Are you going to accept? She asked, though she could already see the answer in his eyes. I told him I needed to discuss it with my wife first, Isaac replied, taking her hand. But yes, I want to accept. For years I wandered, never putting down roots anywhere. Now I can't imagine being anywhere but here with you and Michael. Theresa raised her free hand to touch his cheek, love welling in her heart for this man who had changed everything. From the moment you rode beside me at the Edge of Ordway, you've been building a home for us, first in your protection, then in your love. Wherever you are, that's where my home will be. Isaac leaned forward to kiss her, gentle but filled with promise. When they parted, he kept his forehead resting against hers. I never told you, but that day on the road out of Ordway, I was at a crossroads myself. Wasn't sure where I was heading next, what I was looking for. He smiled, his blue eyes reflecting the first evening stars. Turns out I was looking for you, I just didn't know it yet. As night settled fully over Denver, wrapping their small house in peaceful darkness, Theresa thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment, from the despair of banishment to the joy of the life they now shared. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but every step had led to this. A home filled with love, a family bound not just by blood but by choice, and a future bright with possibility. In the quiet house, with her husband beside her and their sons sleeping peacefully within, Theresa James Blackwell knew with absolute certainty that she had found what every human heart seeks: not just shelter from life's storms, but a place of belonging, of purpose, of love that endures beyond hardship and transcends the wounds of the past. From the edge of Ordway to the heart of Denver, from solitary fear to shared joy, their journey had brought them home, not to a place, but to each other.